Roughly 10 years in the making, Civilization VII is a different Civ game, shifting the formula away from any 4X historical strategy game, certainly those beginning with Sid Meier's. And I can't deny that some of the significant shifts, the look, feel, the break from historical leader and civilization pairings, the Ages system too, all of this fundamentally makes Civ 7 a different game. Yet it also feels strikingly similar. Let's talk Civilization 7. I've played quite a bit of Civ 7 so far, and probably spent even more time with it in the editing room. One thing that I can tell you from the get-go, and I have about 6 or 7 different topics with time counts down below, is that the beginning of the game is one of the most different parts. Here, of course, I'm selecting my leader and then my civilization. Benjamin Franklin of Rome in the Antiquity Age is who I happen to be playing in this case. That's obviously way different from what we've seen before with Civilization, though perhaps not so much with some of the other 4X strategy games like Humankind. Something that feels very familiar though is essentially everything else that I do here. Build my capital city, send my scouts out. The narrative system around it, of course, very different. The independent people system too, different. Likewise, diplomacy is a notable step up, I have to say, from previous games. This time around, influence is a dedicated yield, and we'll use that to carry out actions that genuinely matter. The relationships feel a little bit more significant. However, who you're building that relationship with, that AI player, is a completely different topic entirely. The clips in this video will largely follow the flow of a game, so you'll get to experience what it feels like to play a Civ game as I move through and pseudo-review it here. Much of the core campaign in a Civilization 7 game is very similar to how it has been in the past. You're probably focused on 2 things: expanding, finding territory to build new cities, and then building those cities. Secondly, you may also be engaged in combat, whether you're actively going to fight others to take their lands, or having the AI, the barbarians, whomever it may be, fight you. This time around, of course, the barbarians are gone, replaced entirely by independent people. However, the AI opponents obviously remain. I'm assuming in this video you're playing single player. Maybe you've got friends though. Nonetheless, as you begin to develop these cities, you'll notice that this game differentiates cities from towns. Any newly established settlement, except for your first one, will be a town. I love this addition. Towns are great to use. They require far less micromanagement. You can't build anywhere near as much in them. They're simpler, though they do have specializations, and generally prove pretty useful in grabbing resources and strategic locations across the map. Of course, you can upgrade. Overall, the system works very well. The district system returns from Civilization 6, and to be honest, it's very similar. Slightly different adjacency rules, slightly different yield rules, but for the most part, building cities is very much the same, except for tiles are differentiated, with rural and urban tiles now separate. Multiple buildings can be placed on the same tile, up to 2, and some buildings can be replaced. Anything that's not ageless, that's not unique to your civilization, can, and in fact should, if not must, be built over in future ages. It will lose its adjacency bonuses as you move through. So there's a real incentive to overbuild within your cities, and at least a little bit of a free pass if you make a mistake to replace a building, and I like to see that. On the topic of combat, this also changes in my view for the better. While combat animations have been overhauled to last the duration of a turn, and flanking has been upgraded, both appreciated changes, the animations look good, it's really the commanders that bring the biggest change to combat. Units can be compacted within them, carried across the map, it just makes it easier to fight. They also have promotion trees and extra abilities for their own. And of course, as we'll see as the video plays through, there are different commanders for each sphere of combat: land, air, and sea. All of these areas see sometimes only minor, but in my view, improvements. Improvements across the board. Combat is familiar, but slightly better, thanks to commanders. It's at this point where the fundamentals, like building cities, fighting other people, meeting civs, moves aside just a little bit and makes way for the age transition. The age transition, as I mentioned in the introduction, is kind of the big thing. Outside of leaders and civilizations breaking apart, the game being split into 3 ages is the other big change, right? And when I take a look at the age transitions, I have a few different thoughts. Firstly, the crises are not as devastating as I feared they might be. One of the things I didn't particularly enjoy sometimes about Millennia was its crises events were just too much, too often. In Civilization 7, they are not too much or too often, thankfully just occurring twice. And moreover, actually, a lot of the time you can just get benefit from them. The policies that they bring about, the disasters that they may bring, are not that bad. And there's generally an upside. There's generally a good policy card. There's an event that might hurt you, but also might play in your favor. You might pick up a city thanks to the happiness, revolt, the disaster, the barbarians that are spreading across the world. It's just one small example. Crisis events, not a big deal, and they added a feature to turn them off, which is also very much appreciated. It's as you move through the crisis that an age ends and the next age begins. And here's where another big change, of course, whacks you in the face. You must change a civilization. You must pick up a new unique building, a new unique unit, probably both of those, as well as whatever other changes your civilization brings. This is where the prominence of leaders really has a big role too, because as you move through, you're not immediately aware of who the other civs are, what their unique units are. That is not obvious. The one thing that the game does carry through is the leader. And so that's the part, as you engage with them in diplomacy, that really starts to take the fore. For me, I found this a little bit detrimental because I didn't quite know what their unique building might be, what their unique unit might be. Though I don't always know that anyway, it was a bit of a disadvantage, of course, as civilizations changed through the ages. And of course, it's not just civilizations. Each age will have its own unique tech tree and game features. The exploration, the second age, obviously about getting out there and exploring the new world, the distant lands. With that, the game map will literally expand as you can now move through deep ocean and find those players that you couldn't find in the first age. And it's with that that a sense of discovery is brought, and probably my favorite upside. There are many upsides and downsides, but my favorite upside is not the new features, it's not the exploration, the religion, whatever it may be. It's the fact that I feel there's a sense of early game Civ at least twice, probably 3 times, as we move through to the modern age as well. That sense of finding something new. As you move through each age, the resources will change. As I've mentioned, the map will change. Particularly as you move through to the exploration age, you feel this the most profound effect as you meet new civilizations. New technology gives you new possibilities. I think that one thing that they've nailed about the Ages system, for me at least, is that sense. Building on top of that, of course, we have those legacies. You will have seen me choose some legacy benefits, bring through attributes for my leader, who will also keep those, by the way, through all of the ages. Moreover, the legacy points provide a structure while you're playing each age, with specific goals leaning into military, economics, science, and culture. These goals can at times feel a little bit forceful, though for the most part I don't find it takes away from that sandboxy, build your own story nature of Civilization. A couple of particular points which I could dwell into are, say, the need to find distant lands to complete the economic goal for this, the exploration age. You must build treasure fleets, and the only way to get them, actually not build, but get them, is by building cities in distant lands. Therefore, you must focus on that. You must go overseas. Now, I was going to do that anyway. It's not a big deal. But it's important to note that there is a little bit of structure that goes with these, and sometimes you will have to meet that. Like I say, probably not a big deal because you were probably playing down one of those paths anyway, whether you realized it or not. Speaking of realized it or not, so far you've been watching around almost 10 minutes of gameplay. And I don't know if you've realized it, but to me this game probably looks like a blend between Civ 5 and Civ 6. Leaning slightly more towards the latter, I would say. slightly more cartoony, overly saturated, and in some areas, in my view, overly detailed. And I can't believe I'm saying that in a Civ game, but I do feel it's true. The way that I notice this, for the most part, happens to be when I lose or misplace a unit. It doesn't happen all of the time, but it happens enough that I notice it. There's something about the UI that doesn't allow me to always see where enemy units are, or perhaps even where my own units are. And that could potentially be a problem. It's not an uncommon occurrence. Some areas, while abundant in detail, also look incredibly beautiful. They really do. Overall, I like the way that this game looks. I like the style. With the UI here, yes, it is quite simple, but some of the elements are also done very well. The specific country, nation, civ artwork, for example. Though in general, it takes a very simple approach, right? Largely kind of a grayscale background with sometimes color-coded, sometimes not, appropriately labeled things, like I'm picking out with my legacies. And that's kind of all you get. It's fairly simple, it does the job. As I move through to the modern age, I should probably also talk about the other thing ending with I, not the UI, the user interface, but the AI. How did these civilizations actually fare against me? The mighty, now Benjamin Franklin, led by the uniquely American prospector-filled empire. Well, look, it's not perfect, eh? It really isn't. Is it improved over Civilization 6? I can't actually give you a verdict. I'm sorry. I know that's pretty underwhelming, but I can't. I just don't really know. I can't really tell. It does some things quite well. The way it moves its units around, I'm generally impressed with. The way it builds its cities, it's hard to critique. I can't overly fault it, but it's definitely not perfect. And on balance, the same thing that we've seen throughout the decades persists, I believe. Crank the difficulty up high enough, the game will cheat, and it might beat you. Play low enough, and you'll probably beat it. It's competitive, it is. Don't get me wrong, I think it'll be enjoyable enough to play, but it's obviously not going to compare with the human mind, and it doesn't do that. One thing it does do, or at least promise to do though, is provide a lot of extra content, and this will come as no surprise to you. If you've played any sort of vaguely similar strategy game, you will expect this game to get a lot of extra stuff. The prices do seem somewhat high, though this is expected, I believe, given that this is true across the economy, inflation, blah blah blah. This is an explanation, not a justification. However, the content release is happening very soon. Indeed, the first DLC for this game will release just a month after it comes out. In March of 2025, the first DLC collection releases in 2 parts. And then for many months after that, more DLC will drop. It appears fairly regularly. I think this is probably a good thing on the side of game support, player variety, longevity. Not a good thing for a wallet, right? Obviously. And also, perhaps obviously, it doesn't really bother me that greatly. I don't mind if the game receives extra content. Totally fine with me. I would, however, highlight that if it's dropping every month, according to the fine print, then it does seem just a little bit like the Battle Pass system that we joked about, in a different form, right? Charge it as a collection, but present it every month. No, that's not my refrigerator. No, that's a food and liquid cooling box. Okay? Get away from my cooling box. Nonetheless, again, doesn't bother me greatly. And it ultimately, I think, brings me to the end of this video, and hopefully a nice place to conclude. I think that the changes that Civilization 7 introduces, if I just think of one, the commanders, or a second one, the leaders, their variety, I think all of it is actually very good. Very good. This is a fun game to play, and I'm fairly disappointed that I've spent a lot of time in the editing room and not quite as much time as I would have liked actually just playing it. My hours barely crossed 100. That's a crime. Civilization 7 changes the formula then, dividing the game into 3 parts. separating leader from civ, and changing civilizations, a different one for each age. And I can't deny, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is a monumental shift. In practice, I believe it means three things. There are exponentially more combinations. It's hard to try them all. Secondly, leaders become even more of a grounding factor for narrative and the who's who element of a civ game. Thirdly and finally, I believe it breaks further from history. And while that may be a bother to you, in practice it really just means your unique units and buildings change twice throughout the game. That's kind of the only tangible, non-cosmetic result of a seemingly drastic change. Of course, the break from history is perhaps the most jarring part. The Ages system brings more practical change though, with legacies, milestones and objectives, rewards and benefits for how you do, and that synergy carries through, though doesn't need to be stuck with. Thankfully, the game is still pretty flexible. Leader attributes too change the game, something you actually carry through every age, and the crisis system that heralds through those ages is not as bad as I might have feared initially. If Civilization 7 can meet the performance expectations that it's set, i.e. it works, regardless of where or how you're playing it, and that's something I've certainly been burnt by before, and so it's something that I'd caution you by here too, then I ultimately believe it will be a great game. It'll be the same as any other Civ at launch, or indeed many other strategy games. It'll need updating, it will likely get even better with time, and it will receive a lot of extra content, I'm sure, both paid and free. And like most other Civ games, except for you Beyond Earth, it'll probably have a long and successful life. Change is hard, but many of Civilization 7's changes aren't. I believe it to be generally a good game. If you like Civ, you'll probably enjoy Civilization 7 for many years to come. However, as I wrap up this video, please don't take that as a buy recommendation. I'm just a moron on the internet who just crossed 100,000 subscribers about an hour ago at the time of recording this video. I just want to say thank you so much. We did it! We reached 100k by Civ 7 Day, with some days to spare, and I just can't believe it. So, as I conclude this video, thank you very much for being here. I could probably talk for an hour or two about all of the complexities of Civ 7. Happy to answer questions in the comments or return for a longer form look, a longer form review, if you will, of Civ 7. In a nutshell, here at the end though, it's a fun game. I think I'm going to be playing a lot more Civ 7, and I think I'm going to be looking at it for quite a long time to come. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.